Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Morrison, and today I'm going to be drawing this strawberry vine using colored pencils. For this project, the main pencils I used were Prismacolor, Polychromos, and Holbein, and I also included a couple of Derwent Lightfast and Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils as well. And I was working on Legion Rising Museum Mount Board 2-ply white, my favorite paper to work on right now. And you can see me getting started here on the leaves. I worked on this drawing in 3 different parts basically. First I drew the leaves, then I drew the vine, and then I started working on the strawberries. And I followed a very similar process for each of the leaves. I started off by outlining it, then I worked with this earth green yellowish from Polychromos to indent the paper where I wanted the veins. Then I came through with the embossing tool and indented the paper further to create some of the smaller veins and also some texture. Then I worked on the shadows using a Prismacolor 90% warm gray, followed by the rest of my green pencils. You could see me there working with that Derwent Lightfast foliage. That is one of my all-time favorite pencils to work with for drawing green leaves. It's just a great natural looking color for botanicals. After I had everything blocked in, I came through and blended with my solvent. I was using Utrecht Nude Odorless Paint Thinner. And I applied that using Q-tips for this drawing. In the past, I have mostly worked with paintbrushes, but lately I've been favoring those Q-tips because it's very easy to get into the tight spots. So particularly with these leaves, there were a lot of sharp edges, and it's just very easy to get into those edges using the Q-tips. After the solvent dries, I come through and add my second layers and a few more details and move on to the next one. I paid particular attention to the edges here. I wanted nice, sharp, crisp edges to accentuate all those little points on the leaves. You also saw me using an electric eraser to pull up some color, which also helps to create texture. And then I moved on to the vine. You'll see me working with a couple different Holbein pencils there. It was apple green and chartreuse. And then I used some of the Polychromos to make sure I had nice sharp edges. And it was also important that I have some contrasting values in the vine because I wanted to make sure it looked really natural and just to give that 3D effect. And you'll see me use the embossing tool and the electric eraser here. Every single part of this drawing, it was important to add texture. And those are my favorite tools for creating texture. Very inexpensive, easy to find tools that you can find those anywhere. And once you buy them, you can keep them for years. So next I'm working on the tops of the strawberries. And I just found it easy to work on these one by one this way. I added, again, a lot of texture and detail here. But my goal with these strawberry tops was just to not overthink things. I wanted to make sure I had some contrasting values in these leaves, but this is not a perfect match to my reference image. And moving on here to the strawberries, I also worked on these one by one, and I started off with the outline using a Polychromos deep red and dark red. And then I spent a lot of time prepping the paper before I started adding too much color. I used a sharp white Polychromos pencil to make some little indentations anywhere I wanted the seeds in the strawberries. And then I also used a white Prismacolor pencil for those brightest highlights. And there I put what I think of as a protective layer of white down, so that when I come over with the red, I'm going to be sure to preserve those white highlights. And then after I had that done, then I would come over with some layers of the red pencils. I like to start off with the shadow colors, and here I was using dark red from Polychromos, and for the very darkest shadows I was using the Prismacolor Tuscan red. Then I came over with some more mid-tone reds like the 923 or 924 from Prismacolor, as well as a cooler red, a carmine red from Caran d'Ache Luminance in certain spots. And I think having that variety in the warm and cool tones adds some depth and variation to this drawing. But there you can see me working on that process once again. There's a lot of detail in these strawberries. They're not the easiest thing to draw. If I were drawing these on a larger scale, I might approach this slightly differently, but for this small scale, it just really worked well to follow this process of indenting the paper beforehand and then coming over with the color. You also see me bring in a Posca paint pen, so that's a white Posca paint pen for some of the brightest highlights around the edges. And I like to use that paint pen very sparingly and then let it dry, and then I also come over that and work in and around it just to tone it down some and make it look more natural. Another tiny little strawberry here at the bottom. If this drawing is moving way too fast for you, you can go over to Patreon and sign up for my tutorials there. I have a 4-part tutorial series for this drawing, and it includes several real-time sections, so you can watch me draw one of the leaves and a few of the strawberries and parts of the vine in real time. And I talk through, explain what I'm doing, tell you exactly what pencils I'm using, and all that sort of thing. So that is available over on Patreon. There's a link in the description. Got a couple more left to go. Again, you can see me following that same pattern. Once you figure out a process that works for drawing something, you can just draw it that way over and over and just vary the exact pencils you're using to get some different colors. But I find it so helpful to come up with a process and then just keep repeating that process. That way you don't have to think about it too hard every single time you start a new drawing. For my process, I almost always start with an outline, then work through my shadows and highlights, then my mid-tone colors, then blend with solvent, and come back through and add more layers and details at the end. And that process just varies slightly depending on the subject that I'm working on. Here's my final strawberry. Super happy with this one. I have some more fruits and vegetables on vines coming up later this summer. And that is about it. Thanks so much for watching. I am happy to answer questions in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.